Tzarayim Tovim. This week's Parsha is another double Parsha. We're loaded with them right now. Parshat Acharei Kedoshim. And we're going to be talking about separation and working together simultaneously. And this dialectic is going to keep coming up in the next several weeks in different ways. Within this double Parsha, we see a dynamic that strongly identifies and maintains separation from those who are different than us by not imitating their practices, while we also glean practices that will come to facilitate our working together with and including those different from us in achieving shared goals. As I often say in my multi-faith work, which I was very active in this particular week, we celebrate what we share and we acknowledge, respect, and regard where we differ. I want to strongly suggest that these two dynamics could seem contradictory to the untrained eye, and many can fall into that trap, especially given the political and cultural climate in which we all exist today. But they're actually complementary, each one defining the parameters of the other. As someone who does spend a lot of time in multi-faith dialogue and learning and sharing, this juxtaposition is clearly of special interest to me. We're going to begin by looking at these two dynamics with this text in the beginning of Parak Yodchet. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am the Lord your God. K'mas eretz Mitzrayim asher yashaftem bo lo ta'asu, k'mas eretz Canaan asher ani mevii etechem, shama lo ta'asu uvechukotehem lo telchu." Like the practices of the land of Egypt from which you just came, and like the practices of the land of Canaan to which I am now bringing you, you shall not do the same things as these other people. You shall not follow their statutes. Et mishpatai ta'asu ve'chukotai tishmeru, lalecha behem ani Hashem Elokeichem. You should fulfill my mishpatim, my ordinances, my laws, and my chukotim, my statutes, in order to follow all of these. Remember, I am the Lord your God. Ushmartim et chukotai ve'et mishpatai asher yaseh otam, ha'adam v'chai behem ani Hashem. You shall observe my statutes and my ordinances, which you will do and live by. I am the Lord. Here there are two very clear messages and a division between the two. Further, this formula is going to be repeated in chapter 20. In between these two chapters appears what we popularly refer to as the Holiness Code, structuring our relationship with all with whom we come in contact. I find it significant that we sandwich this code in chapter 19, considered the middle of the Torah, between chapters 18 and chapters 20, speaking of the practices of the Egyptians and the Canaanim, respectively, that we are not to follow. Alex Israel asks the important question, how do we introduce a concept of cultural differentiation, chukat agoy, between Israel and the nations that surround us? The subtext being, in a way that does not incite violence, but rather furthers understanding. He teaches as follows. This legal principle has been at the center of many debates of Jewish law over time, from whether Jews are permitted to wear a doctor's uniform to the practice of men wearing a kippah, the celebration of a bat mitzvah, which was seen as imitating Christian confirmation ceremonies, or Jews celebrating New Year's Eve. May rifles be fired as a salute at a military funeral, the practice of others. May Israel institute a moment of silence as a national memorial, taking on the practice of others. Even the practices of placing flowers on a grave has been debated. The question was always whether Jews could adopt a behavior that was performed in a wider society. Even today, some ultra-Orthodox Jews insist on speaking Yiddish and wearing distinctive clothing, partly as an expression of this law, and avoiding the imitating or the taking on, adapting of the practices of others. We will examine the origin and the nature of this law and its parameters, as well as how to integrate valuable components of who we are with realities of the larger context in which we live. In our Parshat, God warns Israel not to follow the practices of the nations among whom the nation of Israel resides. As already indicated, this warning and the limits of how we live amongst others is oft repeated in our text. We read from Vayikra, chapters 18, 3-4, and chapter 20, verse 23 as follows. You shall not act in the practices, the masim, of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, nor the practices of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you. You shall walk in these ordinances, chukot, that I give you. My rules alone you shall follow. Rashi notes as follows. Nor shall you walk in their ways, b'chukotehem. What is Scripture left unsaid when it spoke of the deeds of the Egyptians and the Canaanites, that it felt compelled to add the phrase, u'v'chukotehem lo telchu. Remember, repetition is not without purpose in the Torah, and in their statutes you shall not go. But these words refer to their cultural practices. For instance, theaters and circuses. Rabbi Meir, however, said, these laws, chukotehem, refer to the ways of the Amorites, the idolatrous practices, which our rabbis have enumerated. Rashi offers at this point two interpretations. His first being chukot. These are the culture of the other nations, like their lifestyle and their leisure. Obviously, their religious practices are forbidden, but here the Torah is commanding Israel to exercise caution in not copying even the conventions of other civilizations and following their cultural norms. If one wants to question this, just look around you and consider some of the leisurely practices that are out there that are not necessarily congruent with the standard of living amongst the Bnei Yisrael as we exist today. An example. As you know, I have the honor and the joy of working with inclusion of LGBTQ plus Jews in the Orthodox and Jewishly observant world. So why, too many ask, is this necessary? Just have our LGBTQ plus Jews live with everyone out there and follow their ways. But wait, would we tell any of our children to engage in the risky and in the increasingly dangerous behaviors that are often prevalent in the larger secular society generally? I wouldn't. And that goes for LGBTQ plus community members as well, who are religiously observant and want to live their lives no different than I or my family live ours. Therefore, the leisurely practices that may identify other communities do not necessarily work for this population, the LGBTQIA plus alphabet soup extended as far as you want it to go, community who is also observant in their commitment to Judaism. Thus, they, just as anyone else in this community, are living according to Kedoshim to our holiness code. One could make the point that this view conforms to the actual structure of the text, with two sets of practices informed by cultural permissiveness, in, by the way, whose context we understand those verses in chapter 18 and 20 that refer to an act, but not the beingness of these wonderful people in this community. And we do not engage in those actions of cultural permissiveness and lack a sense of sanctity. These practices, therefore, sandwich the principles of Kedoshim TU. 2. Returning to Rashi for his second suggestion, chukot refers to idolatrous practices, not to cultural norms. This debate is represented in the halacha as well. We turn first to the formulation of Maimonides, Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah, Laws of Idolatry, 11, part 1, chapter 11, Mishnah 1, where he teaches, Rambam, it is forbidden to follow the custom of the idolaters, or to imitate them. We do not do so either in dress, nor in hair trimming, or similar cultural mannerisms. For it is said, "You shall not walk in the customs of the nation which I cast out before you," which we just quoted, "and in their customs you should not walk." That repetition is brought up here. Furthermore, it states, "Then take heed to yourself that you will not be snared by following others." And that comes as an instructive verse in Devarim. "An Israelite shall be separated from them and be recognized by his clothes and in his conduct, as he is different than they are in education and tendencies," as it says, "And I have set you apart from the peoples, that you shall be mine. He shall not build public places of the same design and architecture as are the places built for idolatry in order to attract a crowd as they do." But wait a minute, we need to be careful here. In reality, for example, our Batei Knesset from different communities and cultures will include design features that are prevalent in their cultures. And thus, while there are certain unifying elements between Batei Knesset all over the place, there are certain features that will be specific, for example, to those that are built in Moroccan style, or Italian style, or Russian style, or Sephardic lands, or Ashkenazic lands, and so on, reflecting the architectural designs of those cultures. We have different food cultures and food customs and recipes that are often indicative of the host cultures from which we come or in which we live. How many of you had 10 different types of charoset in all these years on your Pesach Seder? In short, there's not just the factor of assimilation out, but also assimilation in. However, I would propose this is not what we are talking about, and it should not serve to extend our already present challenge articulated here to avoid all contact with those around us. We need each other in fundamental ways, and this is also indicated by Maimonides in, for example, how to engage in business practices with other nations and faith groupings, and on what days to do business, being respectful of various religious rhythms of life. Ambassador Akbar Ahmed of Tikkun explains as follows. Maimonides argued that in order to practice the Jewish faith correctly, you have to first be knowledgeable. You cannot be ignorant in your faith. He took much of Jewish scripture as allegorical and metaphorical, which other rabbis do not always agree with. His use of the word perplexed in the title of one of his most important books refers to the intelligent man who tries to understand and find a balance between inherited rabbinical law and the world around him. As a true philosopher, Maimonides first identifies the problem of existence and then illustrates how to move ahead in order to overcome this challenge. Maimonides argued that in order to best practice one's faith, knowledge and intelligence are essential, while ignorance must be eliminated. It was an argument Socrates used in discussing democracy, suggesting that only educated people who understand the ramifications of a democratic form of government should participate in it. So here we are again. How do we maintain this balance? Nadav and Avihu, for whom their death opens this double portion, did not understand fully their praxis and what was specific to their mode of observance. Thus we are confronted by their Eish Zara. This was not a matter of shared discourse or adaptation to surroundings, but rather co-opting the practice of another. A similar case could be made for the Egel HaMasecha, the golden calf. Interacting with others allows us to, as I said in the beginning, celebrate our shared ideas and elements. But it is nothing without respect for the differences that count and must be accommodated as well. This is the principle that I use to guide and inform my work in the arena with so many people of other faiths, while we work to understand ourselves and each other better. When the Bnei Israel are enjoined not to follow the practices of the Egyptians and the Canaanites in this text, these differences come to bear. That is Maimonides' point. Know who you are. Know what you are commanded to do and not do. And only then, when you have that sense of self-knowledge, can you interact with and expose yourself to the practices and ways of others. In this way, the differences will be honored and maintained and not eclipsed by the energy of what is shared. Rabbi Pesach Waliki of Mizrahi explains as follows. As a rabbi working in Jewish-Christian relations, I am often asked about the permissibility of the work I do. If opposed to my line of work, the questioner will usually cite the Rambam, Maimonides, the 12th century scholar who ruled that Christianity is a form of idolatry in the Laws of Idolatry, chapter 5, Mishnah 4. For many in the Orthodox Jewish community, the ruling of such a towering halachic figure makes them uneasy. Though there are great halachists who do not view Christianity as idolatry, for many Orthodox Jews, Rambam overrides them all. And so they assume that it is prohibited to engage in any religious conversations with Christians or members of any other religion. In fact, as we will say, Rambam himself explicitly rejects this view. To be clear, Maimonides has his say about Christianity and is definitely not all kumbaya about its teachings and our interaction with it. To continue with Rabbi Waliki's analysis, to those who claim, as it is axiomatic that we can have nothing to do with worshippers of idolatry, we must return to the Rambam. In his treatise, Laws of Sacrifices, chapter 3, verse 2, Rambam rules that a non-Jew can offer a sacrifice in the temple even if he worships idolatry. To illustrate this point, imagine a rebuilt Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem. Imagine that someone who staunchly cites the Rambam's definition of Christianity as idolatry is waiting in line to bring an offering to the Beit HaMikdash, and the next person in line is a Christian. The Rambam is clear. He rules that a Christian can offer sacrifices in our temple without changing one iota of his Christian faith. Apparently, for the Rambam, idolatry does not disqualify one from serving God among Jews. Furthermore, as we have noted above in Rambam's view, Christianity's status as idolatry does not disqualify it from being a positive force that paves the way to universal knowledge of Hashem. Why then would anyone believe that the Rambam is opposed to any and all interaction with Christians? Many Jews claim that it is forbidden to discuss matters of religious content with Christians, yet it is the Rambam himself who rules that it is permissible, even helpful, to teach Torah to Christians because they do accept the divinity of the Tanakh. That is his responsum number 364. As counterintuitive as this ruling may be, the Rambam, who ruled that Christianity could be considered avodah zarah, also ruled that it is permissible and even a positive endeavor to study Torah with Christians. And you also have to remember the context of Rambam in terms of where he lived and what was going on at the time, the impact of the Crusades, the Middle Ages. As I always ask when I'm learning with any group and we're dealing with a commentator or a Rav or a posek or anybody from anywhere, where do they live? Who are they? What's going on? And how does that inform their teaching? So we have to look at that contextually like we would with anybody. In our world today, with so much fracture, this interaction is needed all the more. We need to build bridges of understanding, not construct fences of conflict. So what do we bring to the table? Here is where Parak Yud Tet, chapter 19 of our double Parsha, from which the second Parsha gets its name, comes in, Kedoshim Tihiyu. Just a short segment from verses 11 through 18. You do not steal. You do not deny false. You do not act falsely. You shall not lie, tell a lie. You shall not swear falsely by God's name. You should not profane the name of God. You should not oppress your fellow. Lo tonet dager. Lo tasek et reacha. Don't hurt another person. Do not rob. The hired's wages must not remain with you overnight. You pay them when they do their work. Lo tekalel cheresh v'lifnei iver lo titen machshol. Do not curse a deaf person who can't hear. Do not place a stumbling block before a blind person who cannot see. V'yarata me'elokecha ani Hashem. You should fear God, I am your Lord. You shall commit no injustice in judgment. Do not favor a poor person or respect a great man. You must judge your fellow with righteousness. You do not go around gossiping. Lo telech rechil b'amecha, lo tamod al damecha. Do not stand by the blood of your fellow person. I am God. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Lo tisneh et achicha b'levavecha. You shall not hold back in correcting your fellow, but do it in a kind way. You do not take revenge. You do not bear a grudge. And after this, we have our phrase on which Hillel says everything stands. And we all know it. We put it on our yard signs. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as yourself. We're not talking about dating here. We're talking about Ahava is trust. It's building connections. We must feel connected to each other as we feel connected to ourselves. These are the teachings that are referred to as mishpatim. They are defined as even if they were not written, we would know to do them. It could be reduced to human decency if we wish. However, the reality is that we are all living in a world so far away from even these basic ideas to the point that what once would have seemed obvious, even if they weren't written today, may feel aspirational and like unattainable ideals. But they are not. In fact, they are fundamental to who and what we are. I was at a wonderful program this week sponsored by Reformed Congregation Knesset Israel's Women, and it was called Will You Be My Neighbor, a la Mr. Rogers. It was a panel of people from various faith communities, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and we were talking about the golden rule and how it exists in every religion, in every culture, in every group of people. Just for fun, I suggest you Google the Golden Rule Project, and you will get pages and pages of different groups all over the world, all through history, and how they saw their aspirational community, what they wanted to be. These practices need not be out of reach. In fact, they are fundamental to who and what we are, and we all share them, and this we can share. We can daven, we can pray separately, and then come together and do deeds of social justice. They are fundamental to who we are. In fact, our prophets told us, don't bother with your sacrifices and trips to the temple if you're not going to be able to abide by these laws. If you can't take care of the orphan, the ger, the stranger, the yatum, the orphan, the almanah, the widow, the one who is poor, ani. If you can't take care of each other, don't come and ask me to take care of you. That hurts the community. These dictated practices are a profound part, the basis even, of what our shared dialogue covers in my multi-faith world. Here is where we share, and we celebrate what we share. We sit and discuss. We share our texts. And then each group prays as they habitually do, and we go our separate ways, with respect and with regard, rejoining to share insights during the contemplation of prayer in which we have just engaged. That's Maimonides' point. None of us in my multi-faith world give up who we are. Rather, we confirm and we amplify our identities. That is how we show respect for others and regard for ourselves. Go forth. Bring your whole selves to whatever table you sit at and share that with whoever is sitting there with you. Kedoshim tihiyu. Be sanctified. And maintain your identity in doing so. Do not follow the perverse and perhaps abusive behaviors of others who do not understand the meaning of this sharing and the limits that it contains to ensure everyone's integrity. Shabbat Shalom.